Thank you so much for that introduction. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here. I am humbled to be surrounded by so many esteemed food scientists, people in government and academia. It's actually a complete surprise that I am up here on stage, because my career has been nothing if not circuitous, as evidenced by tangles with the police, I guess. But yes, I am the founder of Spira. Spira is a cellular agriculture company that grows plant-based protein ingredients from spirulina, and we genetically engineer that spirulina to produce all sorts of novel compounds. And it's been exceptional over the past couple years to work with a very talented team to bring novel food ingredients into the marketplace. And so what I'm going to talk to you today about is a little bit about my story, my journey, and then kind of go through the process of what it really means for the future of food and how these microbes can lead to all sorts of new possibilities for you and your careers, and how the industry will change over time. So that's me in my garage laboratory about 3 years ago. I started my career in synthetic biology when I was 14. I had wanted to make glowing tadpoles for my friends. And so I researched all these different papers and tried all these different experiments and ended up failing in that project, but never really lost that drive, that urgency, the kind of creative experimentation that I was looking for. So when I entered university, I decided to establish my own laboratory outside of the normal academic environs. And with a friend of mine who was a PhD in chemistry at the time, the two of us built this laboratory by dumpster diving and scavenging for laboratory equipment. It's amazing what you can find in a university dumpster. And so we put together this lab and began all sorts of different crazy projects. Now, I was so involved and entangled in those different projects that I didn't necessarily understand or realize that I was running out of my own funding. I was putting all that money into those projects. And so when my bank account was getting dangerously low, I decided to embark on a new kind of experiment. Could I feed myself using a simple single-celled protein called spirulina? So over the course of 2.5 months, I fed myself on a diet of mostly spirulina in my home laboratory. And while it wasn't the most pleasant of experiences, it can be done. At the end of it, I came out not only with probably a good deal of weight loss, but also a prospective company. And so that was the start of Spira. And over the course of 3 years, Spira as a company has been extremely successful, and it's all attributed to the help of these fine institutions. We recently received a National Science Foundation grant that enabled me to travel around the country, visit with food ingredient companies and food product developers, and better understand some of the challenges in the food industry, especially as technology is evolving ever quickly. And so I'm gonna present a couple of different things today to remark on. So I'll tell you what I'm gonna tell you, then I'll tell you what I told you. So 3 key takeaways here of my talk is that our agricultural system has been in a realm of animal production for the longest time and is moving more towards fermentation-based production systems. And so I'll show you what that really means. And eventually, we expect that those fermentation systems will actually get more and more efficient over time and become photosynthetic. So I'll talk a little bit more on what that means. Now, non-GMO is really nonsense. I think that based on some of the things that I discovered during my research, as well as just being a member of the millennial generation, it's more of an emphasis on sustainable practices, transparency in the food system, and using all techniques in our toolbox in order to enable food for the growing planet is really what we should do collectively. And so, I'll kind of demonstrate some of the companies that are bucking the trend currently. And lastly, the exciting fact that proteins can really produce virtually any taste known to man. And so I, especially in my little home laboratory with my green bubbling tanks of algae that were feeding me, I imagined a future where we would all have food replicators, which I think is really fun end result for the food industry when we can replicate virtually any taste, flavor, and texture in our own homes. So I'm not the first person to say this during this entire conference, but we do have a substantial problem ahead of us. The entire world needs to close a massive calorie gap. We're about 70% deficient right now. And if you were 70% deficient in any nutrient, you would be considered extremely malnourished. For the next 30 years, significant change needs to happen. We need to dip really deep into our toolbox of food science, of biotechnology, and of agriculture in order to really meet that growing demand. And this is really due to an addiction that we have to these cute little guys, cows. Now, cows are an extremely inefficient method of producing protein. They take years, they're not the cleanest of animals, and it is incredibly expensive in order to grow a cow. In the same amount of time that it takes to grow 70 kilograms of protein, for me it would take 3 months. For a cow it would take about 3 years. So there is a significant paradigm change coming, and that is when animal production isn't enough. And I hear a lot about sustainability. Now, we are on the verge of a climate catastrophe. And I would say that sustainable production isn't enough anymore. We need something that goes beyond sustainability, that goes beyond just maintaining the status quo to production in the agricultural realm that actually absorbs carbon dioxide and fixes it from the environment. We need to take a look and take stock of our food systems in a way that enables us to go into realms where we're absorbing carbon dioxide from the environment. Agriculture as a whole emits about 18% of the global carbon emissions, and in doing so contributes immensely to global warming. So that comes both from an individual stance as well as a corporate and government stance. Sustainability just doesn't cut it anymore if we're going to fix the way the world works. And so what I want to present to you is a world where it's made up of a complex mesh of different new food paradigms that could potentially aid in solving a lot of these major problems that we all have. So what I'm going to say right now is where we are currently in terms of big food industry and some of the problems that we have. So sorry for the blurriness, but this graph demonstrates a significant change year over year for major food companies. So the top 10 food companies have been losing market share steadily over time to smaller businesses, smaller upstart businesses that have been gaining market share from these larger companies. That is due to the fact that these smaller companies are much more nimble and can test and try out ideas that larger food brands may not be able to do. And so it's really bleeding these food companies dry. You see many large food companies dying by something that I call the death of 1,000 cuts. Now, that's a little dramatic, but it demonstrates a paradigm shift in the way large business needs to play and cooperate with smaller companies. Now, this is kind of evidenced by what's happening in the food space. So you see major brands, Kraft Heinz, Nestle, PepsiCo, Mars, Unilever. All of them are searching constantly for better ingredients, always looking for different kind of trends in the marketplace and keeping an eye out for emerging brands to either replicate or acquire. And so all of them are seeking out better ingredients, but what are those better ingredients? This is a major trend. The food industry has a relentless quest for better proteins. Protein is kind of the mainstay of the global food system. And so we're constantly looking for other alternatives that can replace, especially meat, when taking a look at the different kind of climate effects that are going on, as well as the different potential outcomes that we can have for our own health. So as evidenced by people of my generation, 79% of millennials are eating meat alternatives. They're currently looking for and seeking out plant-based. And the plant-based protein market is expected to double in the next 6 years. So you can see evidence of the trend over time of what's happening to non-GMO and organic sales versus plant-based foods. So plant-based is going up about 18% year over year, versus labeled organic, non-GMO verified, and gluten-free brands. So this demonstrates a subtle shift in marketplace perception where just a label isn't cutting it anymore. People are looking for the core ingredients that are going into our food supply and transparency associated with that. And this is leading to major food companies either acquiring brands or setting up their own venture capital arms. They're getting in the business of small business. This is marking a change similar in nature to what happened for large established companies in the 1900s. And as the 1900s turned into the 2000s, the internet age gave rise to smaller, more nimble companies like Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, Google. And so there's a significant fear in terms of reduction in total employee size, as well as the establishment of many smaller, I would call it like an archipelago of different brands that make up larger companies. And one of the main topics of interest for many of these investment firms coming from the larger food companies are single-cell proteins. So over here on the left, you have yeast, nutritional yeast, and over here on the right, you have spirulina. I'm going to first start by talking about the trend that is exhibited going from the animal-based paradigm to fermentation-based production, finally to photosynthesis. So we'll start by focusing on fermentation. I don't know how many of you ended up seeing Liz Speck's talk yesterday, but she gave an incredible talk on plant-based meats and cellular agriculture. So for those of you who weren't there, cellular agriculture is the idea of growing individual cells instead of complete plants or animals. And by farming these cells, you can produce a variety of different products ranging from animal-free milk to cell-cultured chicken, slaughter-free fish, and vanilla, other things like that. So you can produce individual acellular products, or you can produce complete cellular products from cellular agriculture. And the way it's done currently is in these large fermentation tanks. Now, this is very similar in the way that you would brew beer. In fact, many have talked about a potential future where you would go down to your local meat brewery and pick up a craft steak of some sort. So the future isn't all that far off. I'm going to give a couple of examples of friends of mine who have started companies in this space that are closer to market than you would think. So Clara Foods is a good example of a company that recently raised a significant amount of money that is commercializing an egg-free egg white, something that has the same protein components and the same attributes as eggs without the chicken itself. And in doing so, they can outproduce current animal agriculture while having the control over taste, textures, and other such components of the food ingredient that they're producing. Two others that I'll mention are Memphis Meats, which is coming up with a cell-cultured chicken. And they recently received investment from Tyson Ventures. And then Perfect Day, which is commercializing cow-free milk. So in the future, you can eat your cereal and not have a single cow involved in that process. Now, the big player in the space is actually a company by the name of Ginkgo Bioworks. And they're doing a really fascinating thing by commercializing flavors and fragrances from microbes. What they do is they find the individual's tastes and textures and aromas and create microbes specific to producing those compounds. And they've been doing this for the past 10 years and have been incredibly successful and are the engine that is powering a lot of this. Some of the companies that have come out of this kind of activity are Impossible Foods with the Impossible Burger and Soylent, which both have taken a very pro-GMO stance. Many of these companies are very proud of their genetic engineering roots and put that first and foremost in front of people because they believe it portrays a sustainability message that is second to none. They're using the very best techniques to produce the best ingredients for people. And in doing so, that communication message is really resonating with especially the younger set. Now, there is one subtle problem with all of these fermentation companies, and that's going to become ever more apparent in the future as more and more of these companies come to market and become successful. All of these companies still rely on sugar in order to produce their fermented products. Now, what that really entails is that they need a large supply of a photosynthetic process. So I'm going to talk about my favorite thing, which is photosynthesis. I love algae. I've been eating algae constantly for the past 3 years, at least. And it's near and dear to my heart. So photosynthesis, I think, is where all of our food comes from initially. Food is powered by the sun. And if you guys remember, freshman year biology, every step loses energy over time. So the further away we get from direct fusion energy, the less and less energy we're actually getting to our own bodies through our food. So as a company, when I was starting Spira, we decided to go back to the basics. We wanted to focus on Cyanobacteria, the simplest known organism and one of the founding species of the planet. About 3 billion years ago, the largest mass extinction event occurred, and that was due to the arrival of photosynthesis on Earth. We attribute our existence to the establishment of these tiny little plants that produce the oxygen which we now breathe. In fact, the majority of air that is passing through your lungs comes from algae in some form or another. In 1974, the UN said that spirulina was the best food for the future. Algae has come up again and again, time and time again, as a potential ingredient. So why isn't it more in the food supply? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about algae in the first place of why it's such a viable ingredient. So spirulina in particular, 60% protein by weight. It's more than 10 times the amount of iron as spinach on a gram per gram basis, and it's packed with vitamins and minerals, and the growth rate is pretty robust, doubles every single day. This has given rise to some science fiction ideas like the Algae Meatball, which was proffered by IKEA. Now, it'll probably look a little bit more appetizing than this. You may not even notice this new ingredient getting into your food supply due to the methods and means in which we process and prepare it. And so it's that subtle shift underlying our food ingredients that is the redoing of food, redoing the ingredient supply that we currently have. Now, some of the ingredients that are going into the redoing of food are pea, insect, soy, and whey. I believe Claire had mentioned about the insect protein marketplace. Now, I know insects aren't for everyone, but there is some ingredient on this spectrum in which you can find yourself consuming on a regular basis in the future. And all of these markets are growing immensely, taking away market share from other animal-based proteins. Now, microalgae in particular has a competitive advantage in the fact that it outproduces any other known substance on non-arable land while consuming carbon dioxide from the environment. So on comparison to soybean and legumes, which is currently the standard, it more than doubles the production. And these are some companies that have invested in alternative proteins, as evidenced by the mergers and acquisitions. So again, another comparison, it doubles every single day. But, you know, a mark of sustainability isn't enough for the ingredients. The reason why we don't have more of these ingredients in the food supply is less a matter of the sustainability of the ingredients and the production efficiency. Those are scientific facts. It doesn't particularly matter to the everyday consumer. The number one priority to customers is taste. And so without sufficient advancements in taste and flavor technology, we will not be able to change the daily habits of people's lives. It becomes a user experience problem. It becomes something where we need to significantly shift user perception around the way these things taste. As an example, I like to tell the story of lobster. I don't know if many of you know, but lobster used to be a prison food. It was served to prisoners in Maine. People wouldn't touch the cockroach of the sea if you forced it on them. And so only over time did it become a delicacy. I mean, kale was just a gross winter vegetable. And all it really takes is a shift in flavor perception, shift in cultural norms, and a bit insidious swap of the ingredients in the food supply with an advancement in technology to make the flavor really delicious. So I'm going to go into how we engineered taste of spirulina and take you through stepwise some of the methods that we're using in the laboratory right now to make various products, including hair dyes, of course. So just in the food system, I would kind of urge you all to take a look at the entire process of creating a food ingredient and having it get to somebody's finished food application and where they actually eat it. At the very beginning comes the genetics, and the genetics affect everything downstream. And in doing, by engineering the genetics of an ingredient, we can actually establish new kind of flavor paradigms, eliminate bad tasting flavor compounds, and make sure they don't even occur in the end product. And so we tap into the beauty of CRISPR as a means of doing that. Now, prior to really figuring out what kind of flavor molecules we're going to eliminate, first thing we have to do is analyze the organism itself. So we go through a sequencing process as a means of really understanding the entire biome, the entire genetics of the organism itself. That is enabled through these tiny little sequencers known as MinIONs from Oxford Nanopore. Those $1,000 sequencers enable us to very quickly and rapidly go through iterations of sequencing our organism, better understanding what targets to pick, and then quickly going through a cycle of design, build, and test of actually engineering the organism to eliminate bad-tasting flavor compounds. So after we understand the genetics of the organism itself, it comes down to pathway selection. So of this map back here, we need to understand and pinpoint which specific pathway we want to take out, the bad-tasting flavor molecules. And so you take a very complex map, and then you simplify it down to just the steps in the pathway that you need. I liken it to sculpting. Famous sculptor once said that there isn't really any matter of etching into stone. It's more a matter of removing the pieces to let the artwork come out. And that's kind of similar to what we're doing. We're removing pieces from the organism that impede its unique flavor profile and making it so that it's much cleaner, more neutral taste. So this is an example of a kind of pathway that we redirect in order to produce a better tasting flavor molecule from pathways like the isoprenoid, terpenoid, and carotenoid pathways, which are more pigment-based pathways. So next step is actually engineering the organism itself after designing it. In doing so, we have two specific techniques for that. The first is deletion. And so using techniques like CRISPR-Cas9 and other forms of Cas proteins, we can actually very clearly go in and snip out the offending gene of interest. And in doing so, we analyze the end result in order to better understand through GCMS profile whether or not we've actually gone through eliminating that negative tasting flavor compound. The next thing we can do is actually do an insertion. And in doing so, we can enhance the already pre-existing attributes of the organism itself in order to influence novel tastes and textures. There was quite a bit of press recently about the creation of a spicy tomato, which I would urge you all to look into. It's something where the taste attributes get people excited about the possibilities, as opposed to just engineering better yields, which is an emphasis on the company. I would urge you to take a look at genetic engineering as a technique to enhance a user's experience, as opposed to benefiting the company itself. And then lastly, we got to grow it. And so we take the engineered organism and we do a scale-up process. So these are just some converted tanks, a larger bioreactor, and finally, this is one of our partner farms. We partner with farmers in developing nations, like India, Peru, in the middle of the desert, where they don't really have access to arable land or any kind of nutrients possible. And so in doing so, we enable employment to those communities and get a much more robust process because they've been farming this kind of organism for years and years and years. Lastly, we process the organism, and this enables us to produce an entire ingredient platform. And so from one organism, we can extract a variety of different compounds, ranging from just regular natural spirulina to blue colorant that I've been attempting to put in my hair, chlorophyll, and protein isolate that we expect can be a replacement for the majority of protein compounds found on the marketplace. Now, in doing so, we have this technique in our toolbox that we can apply, and I understand that people are a little more hesitant to approach genetic engineering as a technique, but I would urge you that if you put your user experience first, you can create new nutritional paradigms that weren't previously thought of before. Proteins can truly create a variety of different taste compounds, and so in doing so, you're able to just go about changing the way people interact with food. And that leads me to our overall mission, which is to enable nutrition anywhere effortlessly. We really see the ability of having a microbial-based production system everywhere and being able to produce delicious ingredients in people's homes eventually and eradicate any chance of malnutrition that one might have. So that's a very big, far-reaching future view for our technology, as well as for the potential of synthetic biology and its impact on the industry. I didn't even mention the kind of paradigm-shifting innovations that I've seen in terms of quantification or safety from teams coming right out of university. And so I would recommend that you constantly take a look at these kind of emerging techniques and see if you can incorporate them in your practice, even if it is from setting up a lab in your garage or something. So to go back to the trends itself, I hope I've demonstrated that there is a significant trend going from the animal-based economy to a more robust fermentation-based economy that's much more efficient. And then eventually, I see us transitioning to a photosynthetic economy. And the fact that these companies are succeeding in light of their techniques that create a better user experience, I think non-GMO is really a nonsense term. I think that over time, this will change, and we'll see more and more companies come about that have abilities that are able to dance completely around what currently exists in the industry. And then lastly, I would urge you to start incorporating synthetic biology techniques in your own work because you truly can create these amazing ingredients, delicious food products that can produce virtually any known taste. So with that, thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elliot. We do have time for some questions. So what I'm most curious about, in what form have you been eating spirulina for the last decade?
Yeah. So I would say fresh spirulina is always the best. When you harvest it fresh, really like any known food substance, it generally tastes better. Yeah.
Tia Raines, Ajinomoto, thank you very much. Your parents must be so proud. Question around the nutrition. I'm a nutrition scientist by training. I'm just wondering, when you're talking about protein, you talk about digestibility and the amino acid composition, as well as when you're replacing or considering replacing animal proteins, there's a lot of nutrients that are only found in animal proteins, and it's hard to meet requirements. I'm just curious, what is the overall nutrition profile of the product?
Yeah. So one of the things I really took a look at before delving into this like 2.5-month nonstop nutritional rampage was the PDCAS and the digestibility, which is actually like significantly higher than that of whey protein and closer to casein as the standard. So I think it's somewhere on the order of, depending on how it's prepared, between 80 and 90%. And then in terms of the amino acid profile, it's a complete protein, so it has all essential amino acids represented in some kind of way. We've also taken a look at the metabolic pathways of spirulina as a means of emphasizing some nutritional pathways or some metabolic pathways more than others, and emphasizing certain amino acids that may be lacking or balancing out that level a little bit more. And we can do that through one of two ways. Either we can kind of like dope the growth media, making it so that it grows in the presence of more of these precursor molecules, thus emphasizing more amino acids in a certain way. The reason we can do that is that it's just a faster turnaround time. We can test and experiment and see the end result. Or we can genetically engineer it to emphasize those amino acids naturally.
Elliot, one of the paradigm that you were talking about is using synthetic biology to elicit different kinds of protein that can give you different kind of taste. Do you see a possibility that protein can one day elicit the salty taste? Because I know there's been protein that has sweet taste and maybe some sour taste, but what about salty taste?
Yeah, that's an incredible question. There have been some advances in the lab, in particular, a friend's company that has been developing a more tongue in a test tube, I think is what they call it. And they're going through an iterative process of understanding how to create stuff like sour flavor or umami flavor and even, yes, salty flavor, but mimicking those kind of taste sensations and properties via the folding of proteins as opposed to via sodium itself.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Elliot.